So this Saturday, millions of Americans are headed to the streets to participate in No Kings protests across the country. It is expected to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest day of protest in American history. And understandably, there have been a lot of questions surrounding what protest looks like, what No Kings is going to look like, what are your rights at a demonstration of this kind. And so, taking all of those questions in mind, I decided that it would be good to get some expertise or at least some knowledge of folks who know this stuff really well and who have been helping honestly this country for so long. And I'm so excited that we get to have a chat with one of their representatives here today for an interview to talk about protesting, to talk about your rights, and to talk about so much more. So joining me in this discussion to talk about all of that and again a lot more, I am joined by Director of Communications for the ACLU of Illinois, Ed Yohnka. Ed, thank you so much for joining us here on the Ishan S Show today to talk about this very important topic.
Thank you, Isham, for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be with you today.
It's great, and it's an honor to have you on and to have the ACLU represented here today. I mean, I have been a big fan of your guys' work for so long, and it's this is one of those interviews that I've been really excited about, and I'm really ready to talk about so many things. But before we do that, why don't you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and some of the work that the ACLU of Illinois does?
Sure. My name is Ed Yohnka. I've been the Communications and Public Policy Director at the ACLU of Illinois now for more than a quarter century. So I am a long-termer. This is one of those things that once you get into this work, it's a little bit hard to get out because it becomes a part of, the way that you think and feel about the entire world. It's been great to be part of a number of different large public policy discussions over that period of time here in Illinois and across the country. Yeah, in terms of the ACLU, largely the work that we have been doing um, is sort of defending fundamental rights and trying to deflect and deter the administration from abusing those rights in Illinois and, of course, across the country. The ACLU nationally has filed more than 160 legal actions against the administration since Donald Trump was sworn in for the second time. A lot of those are aimed at attempting in every way that we can to try to protect fundamental rights from the cruelty of this particular administration. In Illinois, we have been active in litigation, for example, that attempts to block the administration from defunding and, dismantling the Head Start program, which is one of those things that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, given all the other urgent things that are happening. But one of the things that's happening behind the scenes is the administration's attempt to dismantle Head Start. More recently, we just won with our partners at the National Immigrant Justice Center a ruling last week from a federal judge regarding a consent decree that we've had in place going back to 2022, which limits the ability of ICE agents in Illinois and six surrounding Midwest states from conducting warrantless arrests. What we are finding is that ICE often goes out with a package of blank warrants, detains people, and then figures out whether or not there's a reason to fill them in. So that's one of the things that we are trying to do. One of the things that we're doing again on that front. We also joined a legal coalition last week that filed a lawsuit against DHS for the treatment of protesters across northern Illinois, most specifically at Broadview, and got a temporary restraining order from the court to block the use of tear gas and projectiles unless someone poses an imminent threat to
Mhm.
ICE agents, and that's another just critical thing. But what I really want to say, I think the other thing that we've been trying to stress, and the other reason that our conversation today is so important is that, we recognize all of these things matter. All of the ability to keep people from being harmed, to protect fundamental rights, and to deflect and delay this administration's cruelty is critically important, but it's not enough. And what we know is, that once administrations begin to backslide into autocracy, that the only thing that has ever stopped that backsliding is people power. It's never been the courts. It's never been their involvement. And so, that alone. And so that's why events like the No Kings rallies are so important. It's why it's so important that they take place everywhere across not just the state of Illinois, but across the country, because it needs to be so broad and so large that it simply cannot be ignored, and that it's a sign of just how many people stand in opposition to the authoritarian nature of the Trump White House.
Absolutely. And the work that you mentioned, including the work in Broadview, has been noted nationally because it's truly fundamental, as you put it. These are our rights as Americans to speak freely. I mean, there's this thing called the Constitution that most people, I think, love. I don't know about a lot of people, but no matter what, it's the law of the land, and we all love it, and we all love our right to speak freely, even if there are some who don't believe in it. And so it's so important and it's paramount that we maintain that security for protesters, and we maintain that security for everyone's right to express themselves. Um,
I think, by the way, let me say just a couple of things to that, because I think what
sure.
you raise is really important. First of all, there is this mythology that the Trump administration loves to throw around, that somehow they have a mandate to do all of these things. I would caution people to remember this administration won the smallest, narrowest popular vote in the one of the smallest in the 21st century.
Oh yeah.
In fact, he won by fewer popular votes than he lost by in both 2016 and 2020. So the idea that there is somehow this groundswell that says, let's send masked federal officers careening through our streets, disappearing people, is candidly just bullshit, if I can say that on this podcast.
Oh yeah.
And so, I think that's one of the things that is really important. And secondly, no matter what happened in November of 2024, nobody suspended the Constitution of the United States. And
Right.
we have not been sitting around waiting for 250 years for Donald Trump to show up, to become an authoritarian in this country and to rule as an authoritarian, because we have a house that of representatives and a Congress that just doesn't stand up or doesn't do any oversight. And so that means there is no one coming to save us but us. And I
Mhm.
think that's the place where, we think that these events on Saturday are so critical, and why it's so important to see all of the activity that we're seeing, out in the streets, whether it's at Broadview, whether it's in No Kings, whether it's just in communities where people are responding to activity of ICE and others. This is the work of being a citizen. This is the work of being an American today. And you don't even have to be a citizen, in my view, to be an American. It is the work that we are tasked to do in order to, respond to this outrage.
Indeed. And I think we're gonna see millions of people take to the streets on Saturday. I mean, I remember in June, I think we covered it here on the show. We had like 5 million people turn up, and now they're talking about double. This administration either doesn't know, or they forget, or they don't care that nearly half of this country still does not like what they do. I would argue more than half at this point. I've talked to so many people that regret voting for them. So I think there is going to be a very, very large expression of how people are feeling, an expression of dissatisfaction in a way that I don't think we've seen in a long time. Now, regarding those protests, I've been polling and surveying people in my own life as well as people via social media just to learn about what people are thinking about. I've also been on a couple of shows myself and have been asked questions that I don't think I'm qualified to answer, but I did want to ask you and see exactly where our mind should be. So regarding the protests that are happening on Saturday, a lot of people are nervous. Understandably, they don't even know what they're nervous about. And to be quite
Yeah.
frank, even when I think about it, I don't even know what I should caution people about. Do people have a reason to be scared or to be nervous or to be at all alarmed when it comes to attending something like a No Kings demonstration this Saturday?
So I think the short answer to that is they should not have anything to be nervous about. Number one, as I say, the Constitution is still in force. We still all have a First Amendment right to gather, to associate with others, and to petition our government through our participation in these kinds of events to change their policies. And that's what's happening here. I think that, one of the things, I think sadly that one of the things, we're seeing in the lead up to this is this effort to sort of minimize or to somehow vilify the idea of protest or the idea of these protests. That,
Hmm.
I mean, again, we have this thing where the same people who suggested that a violent attack on our Capitol was a day of love, but a bunch of people showing up with children in strollers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles and extended families who simply don't like what this administration does is a violent protest. That just isn't something, that just doesn't pass the laugh test in terms of what we're seeing in terms of these things. I will say, I think number one, the event that you're speaking at in Arlington Heights, the event in Chicago on Butler Field in Grant Park, these are permitted events. There has been cooperation with the government, and every I has been dotted and every T has been crossed in terms of having an event that meets the requirements of whether it's a park district or a community or et cetera. So there is no reason that people should fear being targeted in any way, shape, or form simply for showing up and expressing their viewpoint on critical public policies.
That's good to hear. That is good to hear. And I guess running on off that note, I guess people would like to know what their rights are. I mean, even people that aren't from Illinois who might be watching, who are going to these
Yeah.
types of events, I think it would be good to know, like, what are your rights as a protester or somebody at an event
Yeah.
like this?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways to think about this as a general proposition. The first is you you are at kind of the highest protection of your rights when you are protesting either in a public space like a park or a public square or something of that nature or a sidewalk. Those are spaces that, courts, everyone has always clearly sort of separated out and recognized that those spaces are in fact the spaces that we use and we utilize for engaging in First Amendment activity. Um, as long as you are part of, for example, a march where either there's been coordination and with police where people know that certain streets are going to be blocked off to accommodate the First Amendment activity, that there's a specific route, that people are not going to be using that as an effort to try to block traffic in other places and or block access or entrances to buildings. all of that is protected in every way, protected fundamentally by the First Amendment, and people have no reason there again to be fearful of being caught up in and try someone trying to criminalize that activity. That is simply people gathering together and doing that. And I have to say, as someone from Chicago, as I often point out, like, this is a city where there's literally a protest of some sort every single day. If it's one person with a sign standing outside of the federal buildings, or on the federal plaza, or outside the Dirksen courthouse building, because they object to something that happened to them individually, or whether or not it is as I leave my building and walk, or as I leave my office and walk home every day, there is regularly protests about the war in Ukraine, or some other issue, either locally, statewide, or nationally. This is a city, this is an area that embraces protest. And, the idea that people coming together in this way in an organized, permitted event is somehow, something that violates the First Amendment is just, it's almost laughable. I mean, the thought that the city of Chicago can't handle, a protest is just bizarre to me, given the fact that, again, we see these every single day here in the city in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's very true. Every time I'm in Chicago, no matter where I go, there will always be a protest going on, and it's just
Yep.
it's like I tell my friends, and they're like, "Oh, is there going to be any demonstration going on?" I'm like, "It's Chicago. Like
There's
it doesn't
always
matter
one.
who
Yes.
it doesn't matter who's coming. Like it doesn't matter if there's an important person coming or if there's a big event. Like there will be people with signs no matter what." So we do have a very important and I think very cherished spirit of protest in our city, and I think it is so important that we continue to maintain that. But I mean, I've been reading reports. I don't know if they're credible. I don't know if they have any water to it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. There are some murmurs of things such as the Insurrection Act being invoked by the president as if he can't get his way with National Guard deployments. They're suggesting with their rhetoric nowadays that these No Kings protests on Saturday are hate America protests and things like that. Do you think there is any water to any of those points? Do you think the president has any standing to pursue something like the Insurrection Act after the fact, after No Kings, or anything like that, that maybe we should be cognizant about?
Well, let me say this. There is no situation in Chicago or any other urban area across this country that justifies either the federalizing of National Guard troops and sending them into those communities, or alternately, the invocation of something as significant as the Insurrection Act. Remember that the Insurrection Act actually requires that there either be an armed invasion of the country, an
Hmm.
armed insurrection, or the complete and total inability of the federal government or local governments to, actually enforce the law. None of those conditions are met anywhere.
Right.
Is it true that, even going back to the first administration, that this is a president who is A, mercurial, and B, seems to have a fascination with the use of power? I
Hmm.
think that is abundantly true. I think the other thing is that when you look at places like Chicago, when you look at Illinois, when you look at other major urban areas, it really seems to trouble this administration that there are voters and elected officials who don't agree with their policies. I would remind folks that when the National Guard was sent into Los Angeles, the first thing that the Secretary of Homeland Security said was that the troops were there to, quote, liberate the people of Los Angeles and California from their elected leadership. That's a pretty bald statement of what this is actually about. This is not about public safety. This is not about anything that's occurring. This is about a policy difference. And we don't
Right.
settle policy difference with troops. That's not what we do in this country. And
Right.
so, I think that number one, while, as we're seeing in the National Guard cases, we'd see in the Insurrection Act, this administration can't justify why it is that they want to engage in this behavior and bring these forces onto our city streets, and there really isn't a rationale for it. I do want to add one thing, because I really think what you said is been fascinating to me over the past week. This notion. So can I'm sorry, I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn, but I promise I'll land the
Go for
plane.
it. That's totally
Yeah,
fine. You're the expert.
this is more of a cultural reference, which I'm, as you can see, an old man, and I probably shouldn't attempt, but I'm going to do it. Uh, I had to laugh the other day when asked about, the uproar that's been created on the right over the naming of Bad Bunny as the halftime Super Bowl performer, when the Speaker of the House of Representatives literally said, I don't understand why they would choose Bad Bunny. Why don't they choose someone like Lee Greenwood that everybody supports? Lee Greenwood, fine singer, good person, I'm certain. No shade on him. Bad Bunny is the most streamed artist in the world. And
Yeah.
there is so much of I think the culture of the current administration and their supporters that somehow, if it doesn't support them, it cannot be popular, which just metrically they're wrong about. And I think one of the ways that we're also seeing that play out, are, as you suggested, these allusions to the fact that somehow a No Kings rally is about being anti-American. There is nothing more American than a protest. There
Oh
is
yeah.
nothing more American than petitioning your government to change. There is nothing more American, than to try to bring about that change through the mass mobilization of people. That's what America is. That's what we've always done. And I think, it's funny. When people use the word hate and this and that, like I have to say, like, to me, it's just the opposite. Um, you know, you love America enough to say that we want free speech, even if it means we have to protect the speech of people we don't agree with. You love America enough to say that we're going to protect the rights of people to get access to health care, even when that health care may be something like gender affirming care that we're not going to access for ourselves. We love America, enough to say that we really want to be included. We want people to be included in this society, and we want to teach a real history of where we are. Like, that's America. And
Right.
and it's really sad, this notion of people who, for whatever reason, fundamentally seem to believe that America is a great place that somehow is arrested in time in 1789. Uh, and to me, I've always said that the most, except for, there's two phrases in the English language that I love and I revere. The first is every February when you hear that pitchers and catchers report for spring training, because it means that spring is
Mhm.
on the way, baseball is here.
Yeah.
And for those of us who love baseball, it is a moment in time. But the other
Mhm.
is those words, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. The idea was never that the union would be perfect. It's that we
Right.
would strive to create a more perfect union. And that's also always going to happen through disagreement and protest and discussion and debate. And sometimes that debate is raucous, and sometimes it is takes on many forms. And I think that the idea that these folks have somehow decided that we are at a fixed point in time, we're done, this is it, this is all we have to do, no more change. is it just belies what the promise of this country actually is.
Truly, I mean, I agree with it. What are they saying? 10 million people? 10 million people love their country so much that they want to see it better than whatever this is right now. That 10 million
Yes,
people love their country enough that they are ready to fight for each other and ready to take the charge and go for progress. I think
right.
I mean if they want to throw around that no kings is somehow anti-American, I mean it's pretty un-American of themselves.
You know,
I
I agree. And here's the thing, like, what is more American than literally entire families coming out to say that they want their government to change? What is more American? At a moment that
literally to
still
say
sticks with.
no kings.
Yes. By the way, yes, no kings feels like a pretty American message to me.
Yeah.
Again, I like to think of myself as someone who understands communications. I think that that is. I met at the rally in Chicago in June. I met a 90-year-old woman who was attending her first rally.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Literally a couple of days later in the building where I live, I got on the elevator in the morning with one of my neighbors, and she was telling me that she had gone to the rally with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's father. It was the first rally the boyfriend's father had ever attended in his life. Think of how, isn't it, to me, I gotta say, like, I don't even think it's about the message. The fact that people are moved in this age where we all live on our screens, the fact that people are actually moved to come out in person and join together, my gosh, that's something that we ought to celebrate. That's something that we ought to lift up. That's something that we really ought to make sure that we're all a part of. And so, I think that's for me, to try to minimize and suggest that this is something that it's not, is just silliness. And it just shows in many ways that for all of, first of all, I think two things. It shows, number one, for all of their harumphing and for all of their chest thumping, they really are snowflakes.
They
And
really are.
and they aren't very certain of what they, of the strength of their argument. And then, of course, the other thing I think it demonstrates is just how insecure they are. That I mean, again, if you want to look at it that way, if you really don't believe, if you believe you represent the majority of Americans, why would you be concerned about 10 million Americans showing up? What you don't like is that what it really reflects is the fact that nobody supports your policy, that few people support your policies, and that Americans have turned on it, and that you represent an administration with a president that at this point in his second term is the lowest rated president in polls in the history of modern political polling.
Gee, they got not much to stand on, as you pointed out. Like it's hilarious. And so that's why and I'm glad that you were able to bring this up because that is the biggest thing I tell people when I get questions about it. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know this stuff. I don't know this like the back of my hand, but I can tell people as much as that. I mean, hey, there are 10 million people doing this. They won't go after 10 million people like that. They're going to be afraid of 10 million people. And they're going to realize, oh, shoot, maybe we are a little too cuckoo. Maybe we need to tone it down a little. I mean, that's the point. Like, as long as everybody realizes that they're not alone, I think that's just so powerful. And I think you're also right about how it comes from a weird insecurity. It's a strange insecurity, to be honest, and something that I'm sure something that goes back a very long time for each of those people in those leadership roles. But whatever it may be, they got nothing. They got nothing on the most American thing that's going to be happening on Saturday, which is no King's demonstrations. Well, Ed, I want to
And
switch gears. Yeah,
can I just say one last thing? I think,
sure.
but I think this then builds on this point that, when you were raising earlier, talking to family, friends, and others who feel insecure. So, you know what? So maybe people are a little bit insecure with that. So, I think this is the place to, find a buddy to go to the rally with. If you're someone that is worried about the crowd, maybe stay on the outside of where the crowd is gathered as opposed to going, closer. Maybe you stay, a few feet away, a few hundred feet away, if that's what makes you more comfortable, but you feel like you're still part of it and you still want to be there. Help somebody bring a sign and make sure that they're comfortable and taken care of. I think this is where we can do so much in terms of bringing each other, is by supporting one another, is making sure that we are, is making sure that we're joining together and supporting people who feel that insecurity or that fear themselves for showing up in this moment.
Very much so. And there are so many ways. And I encourage people to go to nokings.org because I think they have a section on their website where they actually do list some of the other things you could do as well, if you don't want to be in that protest. But I did want to switch gears just a little bit, and specifically talk a little bit about the ACLU's work. Definitely, like we said, not a dull day. Definitely a lot that's going on, particularly when it comes to the ICE presence in Illinois. I mean, it is such a center of discussion. And some of the videos that are just coming out are absolutely horrific. And I think it's like something that you mentioned earlier about how you guys are fighting to make sure that someone can't just, abduct you with an empty warrant and then figure out if you're someone of interest or not. I mean, I feel like that's unconstitutional. I feel like that's innocent until proven guilty or something like that being violated. I don't know. That's what I feel anyway. But when we see like this really rampant presence of these federal agents doing deeply concerning things, in many cases being violent, and sometimes even violent against American citizens, how do you
Right.
guys tackle this? And how, I'll tell you, I've talked to people of color. I talk to folks that look like myself who walk around with a passport in their
Yeah.
bag. And that's
Yeah.
it's so disgusting that you have to
Yeah.
show your papers to prove that you're American because of the way you look. Like, how should we perceive this moment? How should we look to you guys at the ACLU for some leadership and other organizations like you?
Yeah. So let me start by saying I think one of the first things is that we shouldn't let that be normalized,
Hmm.
right? I think you make a good point. We all know people in our lives or people that we're connected with who, for purposes of protecting themselves, have started to carry those papers or do things like that. And they don't have to, right? They are not required to have those papers. They are not required to show them. They are not required to answer questions from these folks. People may want to do that, but they should know that they have a right not to do it. The second thing is I think in terms of how we're thinking about it is what we're trying to do is stop the worst abuses before folks are really harmed. And the harm here is often, the kind of very quick and fast-tracked deportations, is
Yeah.
to, put as much, sort of break that process up as much as we can. While the political process is working forward against this, to block it. I think one of the things, I'll just say this, I think one of the things that we are really incredibly fortunate as we do, legal work here in Illinois, is that we have had for some time such a strong immigrant rights community in Chicago and in Illinois. Whether it's the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, or the
Hmm.
Resurrection Project, or the Southwest Immigration Project, or the National Immigrant Justice Center that's located here and headquartered here in Chicago. These are groups that have for years, essentially assured and organized communities against deportations is another one, who have organized for years to make sure that people knew their rights, they knew how to exercise them, that they built community together so that there was a rapid response for this moment when we saw these kinds of abuses. Because what they're doing, A, is protecting people in the moment, pushing back as communities to try to force ICE out of their neighborhoods. But third, reporting up abuses so that groups like NIJC and the ACLU and others can then bring legal action. And I think that, what we're seeing in this moment is how this network that has been created and fostered and built by people. Again, I point to our friends at ICER who have just done heroic work for years. Everybody listening to this or seeing this has probably heard, the thing where Tom Homan said earlier in the administration, before they sent him away from television appearances for other reasons. But when Tom Homan would say, the people in Chicago, they just know too much about their rights. That didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen because groups started that on the first day of this administration. They've been doing that work for years. And it really is it is a testament to those groups to sort of put that in place. And I think it's something, again, as a Chicagoan, as an Illinoisan, it's something that I think we can all be incredibly proud of. But as we see this now, one of our goals and one of our projects is to sort of build on that work, and with the information and the kinds of feedback, the kinds of things that those groups are tracking, and to be able to take that information and then turn it into legal action, to challenge the administration in court. And again, just last week, what we saw in three different instances, in the immigration case that I mentioned, in the case about the First Amendment, and then in the case of the National Guard, what you essentially had were federal judges, three federal judges, all different, say, that we don't know that we believe what the administration is saying because it isn't borne out by the facts that are actually on the ground. And the reason we have those facts that are on the ground is because of strong communities that have been built up and have built up the muscle memory to be able to push back in moments like that. And I think that's something, that we all can be and should be just incredibly proud of.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's going to get us out of this mess is the work that many of these groups have been doing. And that's what I hear from a lot of community leaders. I think in conversations I've had with electeds on the show and off the record as well, there's so much gratitude for this sort of work. And you pointed out how Tom Homan was like, the people in Chicago know their rights too much. They sound so annoyed whenever they complain about that, basically, because they are so
Yeah.
upset that people know their freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Imagine
they're
that. Imagine how terrible it is that people actually understand the Constitution. If we can thank this administration for one thing, listen, I've been at this work for 40 years in some way, shape, or form. We've actually had discussions about due process in this country, like what it
Mhm.
means. Like people actually care about due process and what it means. I never thought I'd live long enough to see this, and it's
Well,
sad.
they think everyone's stupid. They think
Yeah,
everyone is dumb. Like I don't know why they would assume that 300 million people are dumb, but I feel that I seriously think that's what they feel, how they think about every single person in this country. We're
yeah,
not. We're pretty smart people.
yeah.
And it's proving. It's proving so. That's why they're so annoyed all the time. Um,
Right.
I do have one more question. I wanted to just
Yes.
ask you. If there was any work that has not been reported in the media or stuff that people aren't necessarily hearing about that you'd love to spotlight that the ACLU or that you've been up to, I would love to hear more so that we know for the future as well.
I really would love to sort of call back to something I mentioned earlier, which is we represent the Illinois Head Start Association
Uh-huh.
in comp, in coalition with other ACLU offices and with other Head Start associations from across the country who are challenging the dismantling of the Head Start program. We hear so much about foreign aid and USAID and the education department and,
Yeah.
grants to, to colleges and others. This is a piece of litigation I think is really critically important, in part because one of the things it points out is this authoritarian bent of the administration, which seeks always to kind of punish people for engaging in behavior that they don't like, even when it's the requirement of the law that they do so. So, in the case of Head Start, as you may know, Head Start is a program that grows straight out of the civil rights movement. And part of Head Start and all its renewals has always been the proposition that Head Start programs at the local level need to serve the communities that they're based in. So if that means you hire a Spanish language speaker to help children and young people who are in Spanish speaking homes, that's what you do. And
Yeah.
this administration says, well, that's DEI, so we're not going to fund those programs. And of course, it's literally in contravention to what the actual law passed through the small d democratic process says. And of course, they say, but Donald Trump signed a piece of paper and held it up like a kindergarten art project. And so therefore, that's now the law. And so I think it's one of the reasons that lawsuit is one that, particularly resonates with me, because it does two things. Number one, it challenges this notion that presidents just make the law, which is just confounding for anybody who studied any civics. But secondly, and I think this is equally as important, is it actually attacks the underlying motivations that we hear for so much of these attacks on, federal programs. The idea somehow that, well, Congress didn't mean for them to do these programs this way, when that's exactly what Congress said.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
I think that,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's why, that's a piece of this work, and I have to say that what's really kind of motivating about it, also and inspiring about it, is that when you hear from all over the country about all of the families that have been served by Head Start, whose lives have been made better by Head Start, who've gotten a leg up and gotten an opportunity to prove themselves, I understand that, there's some in this administration who seem to think that the only way to get ahead is to being, I guess, one of Elon Musk's children. And there are numerous of those, but it's literally like people who have done the hard work to make their lives meaningful in a number of different ways. And so I just think that is that is in many ways, at the core of the work that we're trying to do. There's a lot of focus on the immigration, this work around Head Start, around other grants. That have been cut off for speech reasons. I think those are critically important. I realize that the terror with ICE is actually in our streets, and so therefore it's easy to focus on those. But that's a piece of work that I think is really, really important to lift up.
Well, I'm knocking on wood here because I remember we covered a lot of the Head Start related chaos uh, back in February, I think, or whenever they
Probably,
did.
yeah, yeah.
Right, February, I think, and it's I guess initially when they did that random freeze of every federal fund a week into this whole mess, and I remember Head Start was front of discussion, and I'm so glad to hear, and I guess I told the viewers that we would get an update on it, and here's your update on that. The work is being done. Well, Ed, before we do wrap things up here for our interview, are there any parting thoughts that you would like to share with my audience? Anything about No Kings, about your work, anything, just to close things off here?
I think again, I would just, in some ways, just to repeat, one of the things that we know is that when a country begins to backslide into authoritarianism, the only thing that ever stops that is people power. And what No Kings and these kinds of events give us an opportunity to do is to go out and to speak to that, and to be part of the effort to resist that backsliding. And so I just hope that all of your viewers and listeners will do that and, go out if somewhere this Saturday. Goodness knows there are enough places across the country that you can choose. There's going to be one within an easy distance of you. And I think what you'll feel is a sense of community with those around you, and B, a sense that you're actually participating in something bigger than yourself. And that's what really matters.
Ed Yohnka, Communications Director and Public Policy Director at the ACLU. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Sean S. Show. It was truly great having this discussion and so important. And I hope that we can have you back on. I feel like if we had you back on tomorrow, there'd be a billion things to talk about. So hopefully, I'm looking forward to staying in touch and having a future discussion as well to talk a little bit more about the work as it continues.
That'd be great. Thank you so much
Perfect.
for the opportunity.
Thank you.